So you've thought about the kind of work you want to do, and you've thought about the kind of industry you want to do it in, but have you thought about the kind of company you want to work for and their culture and whether it's going to be a great fit for you? Well, culture is one of the topics in today's conversation. We are meeting with Kim, who is a Chief Brand Officer at an EdTech company in the UK. Kim shares with us all about her area of expertise, branding and marketing. She shares her career journey with us, and she shares some great advice with us too. Now, we also talk about why it makes sense to follow your passion, why you have to believe in yourself and back yourself, when it's really important to know when to make a change, why imposter syndrome is not a bad thing all the time, and of course, why it is so important to get the company culture right for you so that you can have a sense of belonging, so that you can be happy, and so that you can do your best work. So if that sounds good to you, stay tuned. Kim and I will see you in the show. Hi, Kim. Welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Jo. Thank you for having me. Thanks for inviting me.
My pleasure. I'm really excited to learn about all things brand today, so looking forward to getting stuck into that. How about we get started? Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how long you've been doing it for?
Yeah, my current role is I'm Chief Brand Officer for an organization called Zero Gravity. And Zero Gravity essentially helps students get from school through into uni who come from low sort of income backgrounds and sort of disadvantaged backgrounds. And we help them through lots of different mentoring and other masterclasses and content like that to get them into the top universities around the UK. So yeah, we take sort of like the bottom 40% of students, but the top 15% of potential. And we help them get into their, as I say, in the top unis and into the top careers. So it's quite some quite interesting sort of stats around, how these students who are super smart, but just because they don't have the network around them that can really help them get into and know what to do in terms of moving forward from an education perspective and also a work perspective. So it's actually really nice to have a really strong purpose behind the work that I'm doing. So yeah, so I've been with Zero Gravity for almost a year. Gosh, it's gone quickly. But I've been in brand and marketing for 20 years. That's also gone equally quickly.
Wow. Fantastic. Thank you. And yeah, I love what you're doing. And I'm really happy that our missions seem aligned, which is wonderful. Now, Kim, this is a podcast. So tell us if you're somebody that enjoys podcasts, and if so, what you're enjoying right now.
Yeah, it's a funny one actually, because I think I don't actually really use podcasts from a work perspective. I use them for more of a commute to work / run around the park piece of content. So my favorite, I think maybe favorites might not be the right word. Probably the most recent podcast I've been listening to is called Scotland Yard Confidential, which essentially sort of goes over some of the key real crime stories, dating right back to the sort of 1800s, 1900s, but obviously also some of the sort of all more recent crimes that have taken place. So when I was a kid, I was just like, well, there's lots of things I was fascinated by, but one of the things I was really fascinated by was sort of crime and forensics. Yeah. And I think, when I was very young, unfortunately, the Yorkshire Ripper was quite a sort of prominent feature and character. And so I think that's perhaps what sort of sparked my interest. But yeah, Scotland Yard Confidential, watch out for it on Spotify. It's a really good podcast.
Wow. Well, I do love true crime, especially scams and financial crime and things. So I'll definitely check that one out because I haven't heard of it. So, all right.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, it's good.
So, Kim, Chief Brand Officer, there are so many misconceptions about the roles we do. So I'm wondering if you can tell us about some of the misconceptions people have of your role.
Yeah, I think, well, it's an interesting one, really. It's not probably about this particular role, but it's actually what I do. And so if you were to ask my wife what I did, she would say that I work in a wanky corporate environment and I talk wanky corporate bullshit all day long. That's what she thinks. And and my mother-in-law thinks that I make TV ads all the time. And I actually haven't made a TV ad probably for about 5 years. So there's lots of misconceptions. I don't think anybody really understands what it is that I do. I
Yeah.
think, however, what I will say is now that I'm working at Zero Gravity and that there's a clear purpose behind what the job is that we do is, I think people are much clearer in terms of like at least what the business does versus necessarily what I do on a day-to-day basis.
Oh, thank you. So brand is, as I understand it, part of the marketing umbrella. So perhaps you could help us understand where brand fits into marketing.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's an ongoing dispute, I would say, is whether brand's part of marketing or marketing's part of brand. I think the way that I sort of split it is that, you know, on the brand side, it's like how do we build and drive brand awareness around our business, particularly because we're a startup, we're really new. My sort of strategic goal, if you like, is how to make the brand famous. That's kind of like that's the kind of North Star for my team for last year and for this year. And then so that's the kind of the front end of the funnel, if you like. And then the sort of second part is more the kind of performance marketing. So it's kind of brand marketing and performance marketing is how I split it in my mind. And then that's the bit about how do you push people through to conversion and get them to keep coming back. So I think it's quite a broad scope. And I think, you know, like if you look at my team covers so many different things. We cover B2C, we cover B2B, and within that we have like brand strategy, we have content and content production. I have an in-house agency who that's one of the things that I would just recommend anybody to do. Sorry guys out there, but honestly it's one of the best things to have because it's just so quick and it's fantastic. If you get the right people, it works really, really well. We cover off, you know, like social media, data and analytics, paid media. So it's really broad in terms of what my team does. And I think it's just kind of evolving over time. And I think, you know, that's the key thing about it from a brand and marketing perspective. It's just so vast and there's so many things that kind of fall into it and make it really fascinating and really interesting on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've just described a number of different roles that sit within your team. And I think that's really, really helpful for people to understand as well. Okay. So if we were to think about in a couple of lines, and I think you might have hinted at this, but, you know, what is the purpose of the brand role? How would you describe it?
Well, there's the purpose of the brand, and then there's the purpose of the brand role. So the purpose of the brand, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, is all about helping these disadvantaged students get into the top unis and top careers. But the purpose of the brand role in this instance, as I say, is all about I think there's two things that I have to do on a day-to-day basis, but long-term and short-term is make the brand famous. As I say, just get the name out there, help people understand who we are and what we do and how we can help you. Then the second thing is around like making the team successful. So there's kind of like an internal and external focus in terms of what I do is because if I've got, you know, happy people around me in the team, that's going to make my job a lot better. They're going to be successful. And then in the end, obviously that's going to make the brand successful. So it's kind of a two-pronged attack in terms of like, you know, what the purpose of my role is.
Yeah. That's really helpful. Thank you. And isn't it funny? I think that if I think back to some of the organizations I've worked with, you know, really great mission and purpose-led companies, and you know, you really feel proud to promote that brand on LinkedIn and so on. And I do sometimes feel sorry for those companies who aren't purpose-led, or, you know, people perhaps don't want to shout about working there.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one on the purpose front. So I used to work at Shell. I worked at Shell for 7 years, and I think what's different, like if you just compare Zero Gravity and Shell, I mean, they're entirely different brands, entirely different organizations, but Zero Gravity was born with the purpose. Whereas Shell, because Shell's like 120 years old, the purpose had to be kind of fitted into the strategy at some point. So it's almost like slightly retrofitted but Shell also has a really strong purpose and gets quite a bit of a hard time about, not, being the big bad oil and gas company, but actually it's not. And there's actually a lot of things that Shell are doing in order to kind of, really move the needle from an environmental perspective. But it just takes time. So I think, you're right. I mean, I used to get quite a hard time from my friends and family about working at Shell, and and obviously from on socials and stuff. But honestly, I would stand up and protect them and tell you that they are moving absolutely in the right direction. It just takes a lot longer. Whereas from Zero Gravity's perspective, absolutely, at the birth of the brand. And what's really great about working at Zero Gravity is Joe, who's our CEO. He gets brand, which is very unusual at CEO level, because I don't mean that disrespectfully, but quite often they're focused on other things and they don't see the value in it. They think it's a bit of an overhead. But actually, he really gets it. And so that makes my job a lot easier, because I'm not sell all the time in terms of what we can do, because he already knows. So I think, it's brilliant waking up in the morning, knowing that you've got a really strong purpose. I mean, I've had some quite emotional days at work in a good way, in the sense of just knowing how we've helped individuals, like literally on A-level results day last year, which was obviously in August, and I'd been with the business for about a month at this point, so I can't take any credibility for any of the work. But when we were finding out our students, which universities had they got into, like almost 80% of our students got into their first choice university, and then almost 20%, around about 20%, got into Oxford or Cambridge. And so, like, we were fighting. These results were coming through on like the 18th of August last year, and we were also pulling stories and anecdotes and case studies, like from the students going, so who did you tell? What did you tell them? How did they react? And it was really emotional. It was like, wow, I hadn't done it at that point, but we've done that. We've helped you get into these top unis that you just would never. I mean, anecdotally, students are told all the time, like, you're never going to be good enough to get into Oxford. Don't even think about applying for Cambridge, because you'll never get there. And then these students have literally defied the odds, and that's just so like heartwarming and quite emotive in that sense. So it makes it easier to get out of bed in the morning, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, making a difference to people who need it. And I mean, I can imagine that must be a really proud moment. It's really funny, actually. So I went to one of the top state sixth form colleges in Cambridge, and I live in Cambridge, or just outside. And yet nobody ever said to me or any of my friends, have you thought about Cambridge Uni or Oxbridge? Which I think is bizarre. I mean, hey, maybe it says more about me and my lack of effort or something. But I do find it bizarre that, they didn't sort of say, hey, if anybody's interested in this, we've got this, I don't know, session running, you can come and find out more about it, kind of thing. So, considering the university's down the road.
Yeah, well, that's very true. Absolutely. I mean, I'm from Cheshire originally, and certainly I was never approached about going to Oxford or Cambridge. But again, that could be me, right? Not. But what at Zero Gravity, what we're able to do is kind of cut the data to show, like, which are the schools and which are the areas where they're least likely to get into, like, the Russell Group unis. I mean, we don't just focus on Russell Group; we do other ones as well. But like, they're least likely to get in, so we know, like, they're sort of like, they're the ones the areas that we really need to focus on as well, and help the students in that space. So it's all about giving them the advantage that they don't have because of the way where they've grown up or who they've grown up with, and it's not their fault that they're in this situation. So so it's good, and it's really rewarding.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. So, Kim, if we were to zoom in on an average week, what might we find you doing?
I love this question, because I talk to my team about this all the time. It's like, there isn't an average day, an average week, an average month. It literally, because of all those things that I just mentioned to you, like, just literally, I mean, I just sort of like on a sort of weekly basis, I look at my diary and I'm like, God, like this, in this morning, for example, we were interviewing with the Times for 6 students in Cambridge who wanted to tell their story and how Zero Gravity had been a part of their story, right? So that was a PR thing. Then yesterday we were talking about the podcast that we're recording, and then like Tuesday's exec team meeting. So that's when we talk about our company goals and the strategy and how well we're doing. So it just completely changes like by the hour, which sometimes is quite challenging because you're sort of getting into something and then you've got to switch into a different mode. But also, to be honest, that's my job. My job everywhere I've worked has always been like that. I've never had any challenges with being bored because there's always so much. There's always just so much going on, and you're working with so many different people. And that's one of the things that I really love about brand and marketing is that you need to work with all the people in and around the business as well. So it's not just, you're not just sitting in your own isolated vertical. And that's one thing that that I really push amongst my team from my own personal learnings is how do you work across sort of cross-functionally and make sure that you have what I call ruthless collaboration to make sure that you're bringing the best into the work that we're producing.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. So for somebody who is hoping for a bit more detail and really wants to understand what the kind of tasks or activities or responsibilities are in a branding job, maybe thinking of someone on your team, what might they be doing day to day?
Yeah, so I mean, like I say, my team's really varied. So I would say like the big part of it is around this content editing and content production. So we have 4 people in the team who on a day-to-day basis are, number one, looking at the narrative for what's the story that we want to tell. So we look at that like quarter by quarter, but we look at it also like across the year. And the analogy that I always use, and everyone's probably sick of me saying this, but it's like writing a book, right? So we know what we know what the title of the book is, and we kind of know what we want the last page of the book to say, but we need to write the chapters. And we need to write the chapters in chronological order, right? Because I think, we don't want to be like having a sort of schizophrenic personality and talking about one thing one day and one thing another day. So it's about how do we tell that story? So the content editor, Sophie, in my team, she's responsible for that. And then we take sort of briefs in and around the business. So have we got a new hero feature coming through on the platform? How do we make sure that we bring that to life in a really exciting way? Or like from a brand story perspective, how do we foreground our brand values, for example? How do we spotlight the students who actually that's what we get out of bed in the morning for? So we've got we tell lots of lovely stories about, how people have defied the odds and how the students have got into the unis or into their careers. Jordan's responsible for our 3 social media channels. So we focused down on Instagram, TikTok, which was a new one for me, and LinkedIn, because our audience are across those 3. So we've gone, right, let's be very sort of single-minded on those 3 channels. So he's responsible like also from a creative perspective, and both Sophie and Jordan are the face of Zero Gravity in the social media space. So they are actually physically the talent in the content. Or, as I say, all the students are also the talent. We absolutely want the real people. We don't have any hired talent. It's all real people that tell the stories. So that's kind of what they do. And then Lorenzo's he's our videographer, so he does all the actual shoots. So like the podcast, for example, I was mentioning, they also do kind of like talking heads, box pops, filming people in the office to tell a part of their story about what they do in their day-to-day job. And then he does all the editing. Robbie's our graphic designer, so he's designing all sorts of lovely graphics for various different channels. And then we have Lucy, who looks after brand strategy, and she also turns her hand to helping on the website and helping with PR. So lots of different things that literally it's just so varied. It's like, you can definitely, sort of be more laser focused and focus on one part of it. But like, everyone's so collaborative and works together that, you're all sort of working on different parts of the jigsaw puzzle, really.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. And I'm curious about some of the things we've talked about there. I think mainly all of them were digital brand. Is all brand digital, or is there any non-digital branding that the audience might like to know about?
Yeah, again, this is kind of a bit of an ongoing debate, and this really started when I was at Shell. About we used to have the digital team, and then we'd go, but it's actually now it's moved, so it's marketing in a digital world. So it flipped over time, and that's obviously that's happened in my career lifetime. So that's always an interesting challenge. So we just say everything is digital, right? But I mean, there's some things that we produce traditionally offline. So if we're doing sort of events on campus, then we might produce like a pull-up, so we can have some lovely kind of like branding in and around in real life, IRL, as the kids say. But we do a little bit of that, a bit of leaflet production, but like I would say 98% 98%, 99% is online. And we are a digital brand. We're an EdTech digital, platform. So everything is online. I mean, and that allows us to be really scaled as well, which is why we can reach all corners of the UK. It also helps from an environmental perspective because everything's online. So there's no sort of carbon footprint. So yeah, I mean, it's marketing in a digital world is how I would describe it.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you very much. All right. So you've already mentioned A-level results day last year. So if we zoomed out and to think about, and again, probably no average year, but what might be some I guess less frequent things that happen throughout the year that the audience might like to know about?
Yeah, I think so from the job perspective, I think the big thing is at the start of the year is we have like our sort of away day where we sort of present to the entire organization what our plans are for the year. We've already written the strategy at the back, like in Q4 of last year, we've already written it, but we actually present it to the organization so that we make sure that, one of the things that I'm really, really big on is like setting the vision, but also helping people understand, number one, how they can come on that journey with me, but secondly, how they can contribute to that vision as well. It's really important that everyone understands the role that they play whilst they're on that journey with us. So that away day, like literally, we just kind of like got the whole team together for 2 or 3 days and went through all that. We've got sort of 5, 6 different sort of strategic goals and strategies that we're working towards, like for brand, for ops, for tech, etc., etc. And so we presented that to the organization and got their feedback. So that's the important thing. It's not like I'm just kind of like ramming it down their throat. I'm saying to them, this is how I think I can make the brand famous. What do you think? And really getting them involved and getting them to contribute. It doesn't matter if they sit in ops, if they sit in tech. I want their point of view. I want to hear what they think, because I always say to my team, I don't have all the answers, right? It's just I try to kind of cajole it and bring it all together. So that's a really important part of kicking the year off, essentially. And then I think what I do with the team, what we started doing this year is like a quarterly retro. So we at the beginning of April, we looked back on quarter one. And one thing that I really feel very passionate about is celebrating what you've done well. So we looked back on quarter one and said, yep, we did this, we did this, we did this. But then where are the gaps? And then what are we going to focus on in Q2 so that we've learned from, any sort of challenges that we faced in Q1, or maybe like from a KPI perspective, we're not delivering against one of them, but, another one's over indexing. So we need to sort of reprioritize. So those are they're the big things from a kind of, position perspective and a strategic perspective. And then of course from a sort of academic year perspective, yes, the A-level, I'm so excited about August, I can't tell you. I'm so excited to just kind of then see really the contribution that me and my team have made in the last 12 months. So August is a biggie, and then sort of September, October, when the students start to go into university. And that's also a big time of year as well. So we spike, but there's never really a lull, apart from probably round about now when all the students are doing their exams. So we tend not to hear as much from them in this period of time, but we're always kind of there to kind of, talk to them as and when they're available.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. So Kim, you mentioned that Joe really embraces brand, and that's quite unusual for a CEO. Can you help us understand why some CEOs might not embrace it?
It comes back to, I think, return on investment. And sometimes there are some brand and marketing activities that you can't hard and fast say, I did this, so it did that. We tend to use a lot of proxies to say, well, we've done this and we've seen this shift, so that means that. So it's kind of like an in-between. So for example, like, if I'm trying to drive brand awareness, we don't have a brand health index where I can measure brand awareness, brand preference. We did it at Shell, but it's super expensive, but we're a startup, we can't afford it. So we use proxies, for example, in digital marketing for like number of impressions or reach could be a really good proxy to demonstrate that we're driving brand awareness, or like engagement rate might be a really good proxy, and time spent with brand for brand preference because they're spending time with us. So I think it's, for me, like the way that I sort of managed to get, well, no, I think Joe was already there, but to help him sort of continue on the journey with, why brand's important is being able to demonstrate the return on the commitment, the time, the resource, and the budget that you've put forward. So that's one of the things I think that I've learned over my career is that, it's, you really do have to get into the numbers. You have to, and I actually really enjoy the numbers. I quite enjoy the platform. We use Sprout Social, which is a really good platform for all our social media activity, and really kind of understanding. So it's not just looking at the numbers, it's being able to put a narrative around it and say, this is what this means, and this is what I'm going to do as a result of it, or this is what I'm going to keep doing because this is working because of this reason. So that for me is like one of the big things. And it's like, you have to be able to talk like C-level language. So you have to really think about, and every CEO is different, or every boss is different in the sense of what they want to hear about. But you need to think about what's keeping them awake at night all the time, and then talk to them about that specifically, using your work as an example of how you're helping drive that or counter that.
Thank you. I think one of the biggest myths that I've had busted over the last few months is that build it and they will come. Well, that's all very well, but unless anyone knows about it, they won't come, right? So
yes, absolutely.
That's awareness.
Absolutely. And and this is the thing, right? It's like I've never worked for a brand where I've had to, well, apart from a previous one actually, but before that, I always had to work around brand preference, brand consideration and trial or conversion. So it's really interesting now because I've gone back to the kind of start of the funnel, and then I've got somebody else over here going, yes, Kim, but we need conversions. We need to convert the students so that they get onto the platform, that they can then get engaged in the platform. And I'm like, yeah, but all this doesn't happen overnight, right? You'd be a marketing genius if you could drive brand awareness from 0 to 50% in the space of a week. It doesn't happen like that. And that's another thing that Joe's really good at understanding, is that brand takes time. It doesn't just happen overnight. And I think that's the thing that everyone has to kind of remember, is like, be patient with that, because it is something that just kind of gets momentum. And and even I get frustrated about it not happening quickly enough, but it's happening. But you have to just be doing the right things, pulling the right levers, and then it will come. Then they will come. But you've got to go through the process in the right order. Because if you start trying to convert people and they don't know anything about you, they're just not going to be interested, and they'll just turn off. So
yeah, very interesting. In fact, I feel like I'm getting some great listens today. So thank you, Kim. So I kind of don't need to ask, but tell us what you love about your job.
I don't think I could give you one thing. I'll tell you what I will tell you genuinely from the bottom of my heart is that I love my team. Like they just make me so happy, and like they're just all so motivated and passionate about what they do. And everyone works so well together. There's no hierarchy. It's just like, here's Kim, here's Sophie, here's Lucy. I mean, we're all just like, we just all muddle in, and we're all working towards the same North Star. So I think that for me, and I love my team, but obviously, and I think all the other people that work at Zero Gravity are amazing. And genuinely, one of the things that we're really proud about is that we only really employ top talent as well. So, we have to reflect our sort of our student audience. And so we go through like a really rigorous recruitment process to make sure that not just from a skill set perspective, but from a culture perspective as well, that we have the right people. And I have seen, and the third stage of the interview process is the culture interview. And I've seen people not get past that stage, even though they've got all the skills to do it, because the culture part is equally important. So, so that's why the people at Zero Gravity are so amazing, because they've been through the process. They all sort of, level up to the values, and we all share the same values. And so we have a great time. We're quite sociable as well, but we just enjoy the work that we do. We work really hard, but we just really enjoy the work that we do.
Yeah, thank you. So Kim, it can't all be rosy. So tell us about the challenges of the work in branding.
Well, first of all, I'll probably just say from my own perspective the challenge that I faced. So rather about branding specifically, because I think this is perhaps a really good learning as well for listeners, is so I spent like 15 or more years working in corporate. So working in big organizations, big budgets, lots of people, lots of stakeholders. And so you sort of like you train yourself to work within that environment. Yeah. And that's a very specific way of working. And some people love it and some people just don't get on with it. Then I worked for a couple of scale-ups, which is different again. And then working for a startup, there's so much difference between the startup experience and the corporate experience, and neither one is better or worse than the other. They're just different. And so I constantly, on a day-to-day basis, I'm reminding myself, Kim, you're in a startup. We don't have a lot of money. We don't have a lot of people. You know, when I worked at Shell, there's like 90,000 people that work there. We're 25. So we really have to think super smart about how we spend our money. And what it has pointed out to me genuinely is like, you don't have to spend all that money that we were spending, like millions of dollars, on lots of different things that we actually either do for free or we do ourselves, or we find a clever way of getting around it. And so I think for me, that's like a massive learning, that even if I went back into corporate land, which I don't know if I will or would, but I mean, you know, even if I did, I could just bring so much, you know, different skill set and experience back into the corporate environment. But then there's also some things that I brought from corporate into startup as well. So I think it's good to get that mix, because I can't, you know, I've been doing this for 20 years and I kind of got to the point in my career where I was like, where do I go now to keep learning? Because that's like a really important thing to me, is that I keep, whilst I'm doing roughly the same job, it's like you do it in different places and spaces, you just continue to learn. So, you know, and the other thing, like, for example, I tell you, I suppose it's quite difficult in the sense I'd never done it before, was PR was never really my thing. I had people in my team that did it, but I would, you know, just sort of like, you know, on the sort of outskirts of it. And now, like, because we're a startup, right? So I'm kind of hands-on as well as being a strategic thinker as well. But like from a PR perspective, learning from scratch pretty much, like how it all works, and getting really into that. And that's really exciting, because we've had some amazing coverage as well recently in like top tier media titles, and that's also down to our agency. I'll plug of them, Goodness PR, they're fantastic. But some of it has been direct as well. So, you know, it's just, that's been you know, just continuing to learn is like just a really important thing for me. And that's another thing that keeps you interested on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you're really right to call out the difference between the, you know, the corporate and the startup and the scale up, because it almost takes a different set of skills and traits, and you know,
completely,
you know, one has to be really comfortable in whichever environment that they choose. So I've seen it where people are in a corporate environment, but they really miss the ambiguity and the, you know, the excitement of the build. Or I've seen people come into startup, I guess, products or locations, but they can't get their head around the fact that there's no one to do X for them, or, you know, they haven't got the budget, as you talked about. And so we often described it in one of my previous organizations as, you know, you have to be a bit comfortable to build the tracks as you go. And that isn't for everybody. And that's okay. But I think it's sometimes about being self-aware and understanding where your skills and preferences lie.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's interesting that you say that, actually, because I mean, we would use the phrase "build the plane as you fly it," and that's a phrase that we used when I was Shell, and that was a big corporate, because even then you're not doing everything potentially in the, like, if you had an ideal world and an ideal timescale, you can start here and end here, but you're zigging and zagging all over the place because you have to. So like, you literally are building the plane as you fly it. And that does happen. That happens in corporate. It happens in startups. I think in startups, you're just more scrappy. And that's one thing I've had to learn to kind of be patient with, because I'm not used to being scrappy in the way that I go about things. But sometimes you just have to be, because things change on a dime and you've just got to be flexible with it. So, yeah, like I say, it's been a big learning for me moving into startup world, but it's really enjoyable. I'm loving it.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Well, if you look back on your branding career so far, what's been your proudest moment?
Gosh, I mean, there's, I suppose, like just in terms of sort of some of the things that I've enjoyed, I think, rather than kind of like the proudest moment, because I think I'm proud of all the work that I've done. I think that, all of
Yeah.
it's really good in different ways. I think there's a kind of, for me, I started my career at Motorola, which, is a brand that may not be quite as big as it was back in the day. But when I first started, I was really lucky that I was working on the Motorola Razr device, which you may remember was like this really thin, beautiful device clamshell, which was category changing, right? So it took Motorola from something like 3% market share in the EMEA region to 25% market share. And that was the first job in marketing that I was looking after all the BTL and all the trade marketing. And that was like, oh my God, this is incredible. What a fantastic, this is what made me excited about marketing. That's what, I'm a bit of a techie geek as well. So I enjoyed the fact that I was working in, on the OEM side, on devices, accessories, and all the sort of content and brand experience. But like just being part of that team, that, the little bit, the contribution that I made as a 20-something-year-old to this device that was category changing and literally propelled the Motorola brand to 25% market share. That's how I started my career. It's like, how do you top that? So I think, that was amazing. I think, when I worked at Shell, when I first worked at Shell, all the marketing piece was, and I went into a global role at Shell. That was my first experience of global, which I loved because I'd gone from the EMEA region to global. And so essentially when I started at Shell, it was like focused on the fuels, and that was it. And then I was like, well, hang on, but there's other things outside of fuels that Shell sells, like coffee or sandwiches or, car wash, loyalty program. And so then where we kind of, again, this was a team effort. It wasn't just me, but like we managed to move away from just focusing on products and actually starting to think about like a brand experience. Because I worked in the retail business. There's many other businesses as well, but retail's the one that everyone really knows. And then from a marketing perspective, we stopped talking about products and we started talking about the platform, and we started to think about like, how do we pull all of this together? They called it the impossible brief at Shell because it was like the most difficult thing to do when everyone's so focused on fuel. And actually what you want to do from a Marcom's perspective is start to talk about the entire retail experience. So I feel really proud about that. I think, they're two of the biggest things I think that I've probably managed in my career that, I look back and go, it was fun. It was really, really good fun. Again, hard work, but really, really good fun. And I think the other thing that going back to the point that I picked up this global role at Shell was like, I was on shoots in different countries, shooting photography, shooting TV commercials. I was traveling around the world, like on sort of marketing strategy programs. And I'm never one of these people who complained about travel, because I'm like so lucky that I got to go to places that I would never, ever, dreamed of taking myself, never mind, have afforded to take myself. So I just think, I've just been really, really fortunate. And I think there is definitely a time and a place for you were in the right place at the right time. I do put a lot of my career success down to a bit of luck, because I'm not sure that I was that strategic in my sort of approach to my career progression. But I think, I've just had a really, really good fun time learning and doing and just spending time with lots of different people. And that's the global aspect as well. It's like literally everyone's really different because they come from different countries and different cultures and different backgrounds. So it's fascinating, really.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for sharing. So, Kim, let's go all the way back to the beginning. When you were a kid, when you were at school, what did you want to do when you grew up?
Well, I think probably lots of people will tell you this, but it might come as a bit of a surprise. I wanted to be a vet. That's what I wanted to be. I go back to what I said before about I had lots of passions when I was a kid. And the one thing that I was super, super passionate about was snakes. Don't ask me why. I just was absolutely like fascinated by them. And I remember when I was probably about 10, mum and dad being on holiday with mum and dad in the Isle of Wight. And there's a picture of me in the Isle of Wight Zoo wearing a Duran Duran t-shirt with a big boa constrictor around my neck, looking like, I was so, so happy with life that particular moment, because I'm like, this is my dream. And then I walked away from that visit, and the zookeeper or whoever it was gave me a little piece of skin that the snake had shed. And then I was going back to school after the summer holidays, and I wrote a whole project on snakes, and I put this little piece of skin into my project. It sounds vile, but I was like really proud of it, because it's like, and the photo of me with my Duran Duran t-shirt on into the project. And so like they were just, and they still to this day, they still fascinate me. And one of the things that was just a real highlight was when I was on one of these shoots when I was at Shell. We used to shoot a lot in South Africa because it was warm, and actually it's cheaper, believe it or not. And one of the shoots, it was my birthday. So I was working with an agency called JWT, and they said, what do you want to do for your birthday? I said, I don't know. And then we just got chatting, and they were like, what are you interested in? And I started talking about snakes. So we got up early in the morning, went on this shoot. We were out in the sticks somewhere just outside of Cape Town. And it came to lunchtime. And so the whole crew, there's about 50 people. We were all eating our lunch as you would do normally. And then I see this big birthday cake coming towards me. I'm like, oh my God. So and despite the fact that I can talk quite well, I don't really like the focus being on me. So I was like, oh, no, not birthday. Okay, birthday cake. And then so we had the birthday cake. Everyone sings happy birthday. And then the next thing I see is this guy walking with this huge albino boa constrictor, right? And I'm like, what? This is for me. Like, they'd organized this. So they put the snake on me, lots of photos. The locals are screaming because they're like, snakes in South Africa actually isn't a good thing. They have a really bad relationship with snakes. And then this guy says, I'm from such and such a place, and I've got 10 other snakes up there that were in like these tubs and stuff. I mean, obviously they're non-venomous, but they can squeeze a bit. And so literally he had, and then the whole cast and crew are literally like touching these snakes, holding these snakes. And the transformation that I saw from the local crew, who an hour before had been petrified of snakes, because obviously they do have venomous snakes in South Africa, to the, can I touch it? Can I hold it? It was like a massive transition from being petrified to actually having some respect for these animals that I know not many people are fans of. But I just, that was just such a lovely, memorable moment. And the agency did, it was brilliant. And that was just like, oh my God, actually this could be my best birthday ever, even though I'm working. It was fantastic. So so snakes was what kicked it all off. And I wanted to be a vet. And the closest I got to being a vet was working in a pet shop. I wasn't that great at science. So, I was never going to get straight A's at A-level. So, I quickly steered away from that. But that was kind of my dream job when I was younger.
Oh, so when you kind of realised, the vet is probably not going to be in my future because of science A-levels and so on, I guess how did that make you feel, and how did you, I guess, navigate to the next idea?
I don't know if I ever had kind of like this moment where I was upset about it. I was just like, okay, well, it is what it is. One thing I was really good at was like drama and physical education. I think it was at school, and I think that stood me in good stead for later years. But I think I just kind of like, and this is actually another kind of like message that I would kind of like to land, is like, just follow what you're passionate about. So maybe I wasn't very good at science because I didn't have enough of a passion to learn about, physics, for example, wasn't really something that I was that interested in. Biology I found quite interesting. Chemistry was good. But actually then I was like, okay, so I really, really enjoy German at school. So I did German A-level, and then I wanted to try something different. So I did psychology A-level, which was really enjoyable. And then, but I wasn't kind of like really that strategic in my approach to, I just did what I thought I would enjoy. And then when I went to university, I was studying international business, but I discovered marketing through that. So I majored in marketing in the end, and that's kind of where my love and passion came. And I think it started from, I remember one of the lecturers kind of talking about when you brand things badly. And he was giving examples of like, when you translate something from Swedish to English and it meant some swear word or something, but it was actually a proper brand in Sweden. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. Actually, I could get into this. So that's kind of like, as I say, it just sort of like happened. But it's all about just following what you're passionate about, because you're good at what you're passionate about typically. And I think that's why I deliberately don't go and work for companies or do jobs that I just don't feel passionate about, because otherwise I'm just not going to put the same effort and energy into it.
Yeah. I sometimes read a lot of articles, and I don't know whether they're just trying to be controversial, but they say things like, don't follow your passion, it's bad advice to do what you love. But I think generally, if you're passionate about something, you probably are quite good at it. But not only that, if you're
Yeah.
passionate about something, you're going to put more time and effort into it, so you will naturally get better at it. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
If in doubt, if you don't have a plan, follow your nose in terms of what you're passionate about, I think is
Yeah.
generally good advice.
I genuinely believe in like following your gut, following your passion. Like, you can argue things with data and insights and stuff. I think it's the same in marketing quite a lot. I mean, you can back things up with data and insights, but a lot of it is gut feel.
Yeah.
So you've got to believe in yourself, like back yourself 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you decided, right, yes, marketing, it's the way forward for me, apart from learning about the language mistakes when branding's done wrong, what else was kind of
Yeah.
happening for you that was making you think, yeah, this is it?
I think when I graduated from uni, I mean, like, going back to the whole thing that we started talking about at the beginning in terms of what zero gravity does, like, I didn't have a network of people around me who could help me navigate this process. Like, I was first generation into university in my family, right? And quite often the students we deal with now are first generation. So I can kind of empathize with that. So I didn't have this network around me that was saying, do this, do that. And so when I left uni, literally, I was like, well, all the jobs I'm looking at want experience, and I have no experience. And the only job literally that I could get into that didn't require any experience was kind of like a sales job. So I fell into recruitment, and I did recruitment for about 4 years and hated every second of it, apart from when you open up your paycheck at the end of the month and you go, oh, actually, yeah, commission, okay, commission makes me, yeah, I can make some money. But I mean, no disrespect to anybody who's in recruitment, but it just wasn't for me. And so like it was what I really love now about what the students can do at uni is that they can do internships and they can get work experience whilst they're at uni. Sometimes that's paid. Like we do a paid internship every summer at Zero Gravity. And I think that's brilliant, because then you can leave university with your degree and say, yes, I have got some experience, and this is what I did when I was at uni. So I think that for me is like really important. So anyway, so I fell into recruitment, and then I sort of fell into training for Motorola. This is how I got into Motorola. My job was to drive. I was living in Bristol at the time. I would drive around the Southwest and South Wales and train all of the people that worked in the stores like Carphone Warehouse and O2 and Vodafone, and train them on the new devices. So that was my job for like about a year. I think I drove about 40,000 miles in that year to get to all these various different places to train people on the new devices. And then going back to what I said earlier about being in the right time, being in the right place at the right time, I was talking to a lady called Michelle Butler, who was the EMEA marketing director at Motorola. And I was just chatting with her, and she was like, so what did you do at uni? La, la, la. I said, well, I majored in marketing. She said, oh, really? That's very interesting. She said, we're about to launch a new product called the V600, I remember. And she said, what I would like you to do is just pull a presentation together and tell me how you would take this product to market. So I was like, yeah, all right then, because I'm quite creative as well. So I was like, yeah, PowerPoint, I can do that. So I presented to her a couple of days later, like my thoughts. I mean, it was carte blanche. There was no budget. There was this. I mean, I went quite crazy with what I was proposing. And then at the end of it, she said, I really like what you've done. When I have got a job in my team, I want you in my team. And true to her word, 3 months later, she called me and she said, I've got a job in my team and I want you in my team. So it's like, it was just, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, talking to the right person. I wasn't bigging myself up, because that's actually a learning for me. It's about building your profile. I'm not very good at that. But I just happened to be saying the right thing to the right person. And then the rest is history, as they say, because then that was my stepping stone into marketing. Yeah. So I'm eternally grateful to Michelle Butler for her foresight and vision.
Well, I think a couple of things that I really love about that is that you were in the right room, in that you were talking to her, right? But you weren't, you were having the conversation. So that could have been quite intimidating for you, but you had the conversation, you were open and honest about what you'd been doing and so on. And, she set you that challenge, but you put all effort into delivering on that challenge.
Yeah.
Which obviously was enough to make her think, wow, this person's great. I do want her in my team. So I think that there's, being in the right room, but there's certainly a lot of credit that's due there as well. Yeah.
Oh, well, you're very kind. I think it's one of the massive learnings for me, and I'm still really bad at it, is this whole like external network profile building. Some people are naturally really good at it and love to build PR around themselves. And I know I'm doing this podcast with you and I'm enjoying it, but I was put in contact with you by my mate, as you know. So like I didn't kind of reach out. So I'm just really bad at it. And I just think that's a massive learning for anybody. It's like you really do need to build your own kind of like personal brand and your external profile. Don't worry about your profile internally. Worry more about it externally, because they're the conversations that will kind of help you go places. And I think that's a big learning from me. When I was at Shell, I probably spent too much time trying to impress people internally and wasn't really thinking about, what there's life outside of Shell, and starting to really think about who I need to be talking to move my career forward. So in the right time and right place, but also speak to the right people.
Yeah. And I think also you mentioned that you fell into that recruitment role and then you were in this sales training role. I think sometimes that even in jobs that we don't like, we still learn, don't we? So some of those skills have probably come in useful in later life for you. So I think that's a nice lesson for people as well, if their first job isn't the perfect job.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, having spent a year training 20-something-year-olds, I was a late 20-something-year-old at that point, I think, training them how to use new devices, all the insights that I learned from the pushback on why they didn't want to have a Motorola brand, because then Nokia was number one, right? So they all wanted Nokia. Nobody wanted a Motorola device. But then I could take those insights into the business. And of course, marketing should be driven by your data and insights. I had anecdotal feedback from probably 1,000 different retail salespeople who were selling these devices day in, day out. So definitely, that was really helpful. Like last year we had the interns at Zero Gravity. I'm definitely not a Gen Z, and they're all Gen Zs. And that's a big learning for me. So I learned so much by just spending literally a couple of weeks. They were there for 6, but I spent sort of 2 weeks with them. And I came out feeling like, okay, and I understand this audience better. And again, marketing is all about putting your audience first. So you're right. I mean, you despite the fact it may not be what you want to do specifically at that time, but there's always massive learnings from whatever you're doing, really.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. So you're now in the marketing department. What happens next?
Yes. Well, I mean, I think, the key thing for me was when I worked at Motorola, I was so lucky at Motorola because the culture was my kind of culture. Like I'll go on to talk about a culture which was not my kind of culture, but there's no right or wrong. It's just what's right for you. And like being at Motorola, I was just able to be myself, right? I was just able to it's silly things like you could wear what the hell you wanted to wear. You could speak the way you wanted to. There was no real hierarchy. You could talk to whoever you wanted to. And so I think from that perspective was like, this is my first job. I'm working on a device that's incredible. I'm cutting my teeth in marketing. I'm working with some amazing people. And just the culture just felt really, really nice. So I think that and I stayed there I was there for 6 or 7 years. I loved working there. I think it's just, you kind of need to just know when you've given your best and when it's time to move on. And I think that's something that I've learned, like at Motorola particularly and at Shell, because they're the two places that I've spent the longest period of time, is knowing when you get to that point where you just think, do you know what, I've given as much as I can. I'm not going to learn anymore. I can't give anymore. It's time for me to think about what the next step is. And so I think that for me but then my expectation was, and I keep saying this to my team, who some of them are in their first jobs, is when you move to the next organization, just count your chickens now about how lucky you are in terms of this culture, because the next step, which for me, I then went on to work at LG, was not my kind of culture. And I really struggled. I stayed there for about 3 years, but I really struggled because as I say, there's no right or wrong. It's just that they work differently. And so you have to really embrace like what you've got in front of you at that particular time and take from it what you can. And then just be really super smart about making sure like that you check out the culture in your next organization, because if you're not enjoying it, goes back to the passion points, right? If you're not enjoying it for whatever reason it might be, and it might be the people, it might be the kind of expectations around, you know, your work-life balance, that kind of stuff, then, you know, you really need to check that out properly ahead of stepping into your next role.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think it'd be really nice if you could explain to us why culture is so important. And then secondly, you know, how might somebody try to figure out the culture when they're looking at a potential employer?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think, like, for example, again, I'll just use zero gravity as an example. Is like with zero gravity, it's absolutely existential to what we do. And I think it's existential to startups because you've got that opportunity to set the foundation. So the way that I would describe it is like the vision is where you're going and culture is kind of how you're going to get there. So that's kind of like the really important piece to me. So it's like, it's how the culture is going to drive how you grow as a business. It's also going to drive how you weather the storm. So when you hit some bumps in the road, it's going to be the people and the culture around you that's going to hold you together. And I think that, you know, that's really true. I mean, you know, we all hit bumps in the road, particularly when you work at a startup. And I think the culture for sure is something in zero gravity that really just binds us. And then there's some kind of like practical things that we do as well. So for example, we have monthly cultural meetings. We have a culture secretary. It's not his day job, but he is the culture sec, and who runs these sessions. We use Slack. So on Slack and Lattice as well. So we have a praise channel. So like, for example, I praised three of my team this morning for something that they've done, which was amazing. And it's just nice to kind of get that pat on the back. So it's a very positive environment to work in. And I think it goes back to, as I say, being sort of like-minded and everybody kind of embracing the values and being on the same page. Because if you don't have that, that's when everything can literally fall apart. And we talk about it a lot because we're heading for Series A funding, which means we're probably going to double in size if we have a successful Series A. And that's when that's when your culture can fall apart, when there's more people and you bring in more people that you don't know. They could bring in some toxicity you don't know. So you've got to be really protective about that. So that for me is really important. Every single person in the zero gravity business will be able to tell you what our 4 brand values are and what they mean 100%, because it's so instilled into everybody. I've worked in organizations before that I wouldn't be able to tell you what the values are because they were just there. They were just a piece of paper, you know, part of the brand strap. Here's your brand values. These are properly lived and breathed every single day. So they're super, super important. And then, you know, if you can buy into those values and believe in those values and see how your behavior kind of embraces those values, then that's how you know that this is the right sort of business for you. Like I say, the third interview in our recruitment process is all about culture, and we will ask questions specifically around those 4 brand values to ensure that we're getting the right kind of person into the organization.
Yeah, it's so important. It's so important. I'm lucky enough to have worked for companies that really take culture seriously. And it, you know, if you get it right and you feel like you're in the right place, it's such a great feeling. I've often people talk about culture as being the place where you can take your whole self to work. And I really like an expression that's sometimes used in diversity and inclusion, and it's I was invited to the party and I was invited to dance, but they were playing my music too, and I could dance the way I wanted to dance. And I think that's quite nice, isn't it? Because
really nice.
If you go to a party but you're not invited to dance, or they're not playing your music, or you can't dance how you want to dance, then you're not included, no matter what brand values are on the wall. So it's a nice way of
exactly. No, that's a really nice way of kind of like bringing that to life, for sure. Like that's right. I mean, you're invited to dance and they're playing your music. I mean, that zero gravity is playing my music, and I'm the oldest person in the house. So.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so when you moved from Motorola to LG, was that still an EMEA marketing role before you moved into the global role at Shell?
So I had 3 regional roles. So I had the Motorola one, then LG, and then I worked at HTC. And then I went from HTC into Shell into the global position. So LG was, so Motorola was Europe, Middle East, Africa. LG was Europe, and then HTC was back to Europe, Middle East, Africa. So it was a slightly smaller remit, but still a lot of markets to cover off at LG. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess, how would you, are there any kind of highs or any sort of points to call out there on that journey through those organisations? And I'm assuming you were being promoted at the time and so on.
Yeah. I guess the one thing I would sort of talk about is imposter syndrome a little bit, in that what I've recognized, and honest to God, I still felt this when I started my new job in July last year, is every single job you go into, you feel this imposter syndrome, but don't worry about it, because probably 90% of the population feel the same thing, because it's a different company, it's a different environment. Because you're being promoted, as you say, you're also moving into a bigger role. So you're also kind of like asking yourself, God, can I really do this? How do I go about it? What's the best way? Then you go in with all these plans in your head about what you're going to do. And it's like, actually, don't rock the boat, right? Don't go in and just change everything. Just go in and learn and listen and be a sponge. Because if you make some changes and make some decisions too early on, then you're going to find yourself in a bit of a tricky situation, because that imposter syndrome is something, as I say, that you will just never get over. If you have it, you have it. But just believe in yourself as much as you can. And that's what I kept telling myself. It's like, you can do this job. You're going to be good at this job. But until you're in it doing it, you've got to kind of prove it to yourself. So I think, imposter syndrome is something just to kind of like be aware of, but don't shy away from it, because you can do it. You absolutely can do it.
Yeah, it's completely natural, isn't it, to have those feelings as soon as you step outside of your comfort zone. But if you're not outside of your comfort zone, you're not learning and you're not growing. So it's just understanding that they're completely natural feelings. And even if you can't believe in yourself, somebody else has believed in you to put you in that role.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And I think I heard on a podcast the other day about somebody saying, like, you know, you've applied for that job and you've got that job, but somebody else has given it to you. So actually, if you do screw up, it might not just be your fault. It's somebody else's who's decided on the skill set that you presented at interview that you can do the job. So I just think it's like, you know, and also I think we look at a job description. Like I actually looked for my job description before I joined this call, just to kind of see if there's anything that I could glean from it that might be interesting. And I looked at it going, it's kind of all different to where it was like a year ago in terms of what we're doing and how we're doing it. So it's like you can absolutely shape the job that you want to do. You know, like the example I gave at Shell before, I went in to look after BTL fuels and I ended up looking after the whole of retail. It's like you shape it and you make it what you want to be, and you see the business differently because you're coming from outside. Everyone else has kind of got quite an isolated kind of view. You see it differently, and you can shape it and you can scope it to kind of to suit you and to suit the business, but also to sort of suit your strengths as well.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so you move to the global role at Shell. So I'd love to understand the major differences between working for regional in a regional role to a global role, and I'd also love to understand how it felt to move from telco to oil and gas.
Yeah, well, I'll start with the second question actually, because what was really interesting. So I was at Motorola, LG, and HTC. And literally, there were 2 other brands potentially that were kind of big hitters at that time. So one was Samsung and one was Apple. And then and Samsung and LG are both South Korean organizations, right? So from a culture perspective, I declined even looking at Samsung. I didn't even apply. But I thought Apple could be quite interesting. And so I went along to a workshop or a meeting or something. Like there was a bunch of people that were invited because somebody from Motorola that I knew actually was working at Apple at the time. So she invited me across to this meeting. So I went across, blah, blah, blah. And it was all very good. And that was probably about 6 months ahead of me being at Shell. And nothing happened. And I was like, well, Apple are probably the best brand out there at the minute, but I might be getting sort of typecast because I've been in telco for such a long time. Because at that point, I think I've been in telco about 12 years, 10 to 12 years. And so anyway, so then this job came up at Shell, which I'll come back to in a sec, but the job came up at Shell and I took it mainly because it was a global role.
Yeah.
On the day I started at Shell, guess where the phone call came from for an interview? At Apple.
Apple.
By which point I was just like, no, you've already started your job at Shell. You've made that decision. Yeah. And actually it was the best decision I've made, because what I discovered, and it's common knowledge, but like all of the really good creative marketing work comes out of California in Apple. So you have to be based over in the States to be getting involved in that. What happened in a region, because it was a regional role at Apple that they wanted to talk to me about, was literally like, you take the stuff down from California, which is what happened at Motorola, and trying to take US stuff and make it work in Europe is really difficult. So actually, it again, right time, right place. It worked out right that I'd moved to Shell. I'd got this global role. And so it would have been nice to have Apple on my CV, but you know, you can't have it all, can you? I had like probably one of the world's biggest brands on my CV was Shell anyway. So, I don't have any regrets about it. Like literally, I feel like, again, it was meant to be. It was one of those things that absolutely happened for a reason. But I think just back to your first question around sort of regional to global, I think, you know, the example that I've just used in terms of trying to produce marketing material or campaigns that works even cross country is difficult, never mind cross regions, because everyone's so different. And I don't just mean by the way that people look or the way that people talk. It's just so many things so when I was doing these photo shoots in South Africa that I mentioned earlier, they were global photo shoots. Mm-hmm. So we had to, you wouldn't believe the amount of detail that we had to go into in terms of like the food that we would show and how it would be presented, the drinks that we were doing, the trees. I always remember this conversation about the trees, because the trees are, you know, when you go on holiday, right? You see a tree and you're like, oh, I feel like I'm in Scandinavia, or oh, I feel like I'm in, you know, Spain or whatever. Trees. So there was a conversation about trees. And then we also had, and the other great thing about Cape Town is that there's a massive variety of people. So when you're looking for talent who are being the models or whatever, we could find lots of various different people. So we had to find 3 different types of people for every single photo that we wanted to take, so that the photo and the drink and the food and the trees could work across all the different regions. So that's why these shoots were pretty long. I was there for like maybe 2 or 3 weeks at a time, but there's just so much that you have to take into consideration that it's very, very hard to have, like, you can't have a one size fits all. No. So the other thing that we used to do a lot at Shell was, I mentioned it earlier, about ruthless collaboration with the different markets in terms of, right, what do you need? How can I help you? Do you want to be part of the production in some way, shape or form, so that you can steer it for your region or for your market? So that part is really, really important. And then also what we did find sort of latterly was kind of different ways to make sure that we had these options for the different markets to have their, as I say, their talent or their products or whatever that was involved in it. So, but it's super complicated. It's really, really difficult. But it was great being in a global role out of London, because I mean there are some, but you know they're not that easy to find, and so like having that opportunity to stay in London and manage a global position was fantastic.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. And it's funny, isn't it? You just don't even think that level of detail goes into it. And actually, you've just reminded me the other day I read about a job called localization, and it's not just about translation, but like you say, it's, you know, what kind of words would they need to use in this book instead of the tongue that it was written in, or, you know, what kind of references, and it sounds similar to what you're saying around like the trees and the people and so on.
Yeah, I mean, we call it transcreation. We used to call it transcreation rather than translation, because you're right. It's like you're not translating word for word. You have to transcreate it, so it has to have meaning for that particular individual and that culture and that language. It's not just the language bit that's the important bit. So but that's what makes it. So again, I just go back to, you know, every day is a different day. It's like because you were just doing so many different things, and because, you know, across Shell, I mean, we had 80 or 90 markets, but we probably spent a lot of our time maybe with 20, 25 of them. So constantly like different time zones, we had to work around that. Different languages, everyone spoke English really well, but you still had to remember not to use colloquialisms and not to speak too quickly and all that kind of stuff. So it's just fascinating. Just broadens your own horizons and makes you think differently about, you don't just live in this tiny little space in London or whatever. It's like the world is a very different place.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm curious about how you felt when you moved to oil and gas from, having been in these 3 high-profile telecommunications firms. And I'm guessing there probably were some nerves and imposter syndrome coming in at this point. But, how did it feel knowing that you were going to be, leading this function for a brand new sector?
Yeah, well, I mean, I wasn't leading the function. I wasn't quite that senior, but I was managing the marketing communications. That's, as I say, started with fuels and then sort of stretched across the retail business. Nervous because I knew nothing about fuel, and it's really, really technical, super technical, right? So we used to have kind of like, I actually sat next to one of the fuels people who was super smart, and she would like tell me and help me like negotiate and direct me in to understand the molecules and all that kind of interesting stuff that goes into fuel. But I suffered a little bit in the sense of, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a bit of a techie geek. So I loved all the devices and the accessories and stuff that was in telco. And then suddenly I'm going into a space where I'm trying to market something that is intangible. So like you used to call it at HCC like the pub test. Like you get your phone out on the table in the pub and people start talking about your phone. You pick it up, you touch it, you feel it. And then suddenly you've got fuel. Like, number one is not sexy, and number two is not tangible. So it's like, how do you bring that to life and help the audience understand, number one, why they should choose Shell over BP or Esso? That was quite easy. But then how do you then make them also upgrade from like the basic fuel to Shell V-Power, which was the premium fuel? And so it was actually really interesting because it's not tangible, right? So we kind of, with Shell V-Power, the premium fuel, started talking about the way it makes you feel. So when you drive off the forecourt, you kind of feel this like acceleration and this kind of like this massive momentum behind your car. People say that they feel it. I don't believe it's true, but it's a psyche, right? So this is a marketing thing. You kind of like tap into that psyche again, but that all came from insights as well of people saying, this is how I feel when I drive off the forecourt with the Shell V-Power in my car. So it was difficult in the first instance because I'm like, hang on, I know nothing about fuels. I knew nothing about Shell other than what you guys read in the paper. Like it was a massive, massive learning. And then I was going from EMEA to a global role as well. So I think, my boss, when I first started, said, it's going to take you at least 6 months to get into this role and get your feet under the table. And she was so right. And I say that to my teams now, because it's like, and zero gravity is nowhere near as complicated as Shell, but it still takes you a lot of time when you're new into a business, you're new into a position, you're new into an organization with people you don't know. Like trying to learn how to navigate a business is really, really difficult. And it does take time. So she was absolutely right. It does take about 6 months. And as I say, I pass that piece of advice on to my team all the time when they're new in. It's like, I don't expect you to deliver tomorrow because you need time to get your feet under the table.
Yeah. And I think it is a great company that allows new employees to do that, to really, understand the business, understand the values, get to know everybody, and especially get to know all of the different partners and stakeholders they might be working with and collaborating with. I think that's a really good way to onboard people because it sets them up for success.
Yeah, absolutely. And it takes the pressure off as well, right? So you're not thinking, oh God, I've not delivered quickly enough and she's expecting me to do this. So I think the stakeholder piece was the big, big, big learning for me at Shell, because there was, and so I talk about a lot of the places I've worked, there was no hierarchy. At Shell, there's hierarchy, right? So there are just layers and layers and layers. And there's also verticals and divisions or departments that think they should have a say in something you're doing when probably they shouldn't, but that's the way it's always been, so let's continue working like that. And that makes for some tricky conversations. But that stakeholder management piece, going back to what I said before, that's where I learn like how to manage stakeholders, because you've got to take them on the journey. You've got to give them that vision. You've got to show them, like, what are the key milestones at which I need your approval or I need your input. Be really clear on like who's in charge, who are you just consulting, who are you just informing, and making that process really, really smooth. And I think, I had a couple of challenges in Shell, like full disclosure, in terms of like probably not doing that very well to start with. But massively learned from that. But I think the other thing is like, you've also got to stand your ground. So like there will be people who think they should have a point of view. The way I kind of approach that is like, I will listen to everybody's feedback, but then as the product or the campaign owner or whatever, the brand owner, it's my decision to take that piece of feedback or not take that piece of feedback. Because if you take everybody's piece of feedback, you're going to end up building a Frankenstein monster, right? And that's not good for anybody. So, and when you've got stakeholders who say, well, I don't really like that TV ad, and you go, but you're not my target audience. So what you say on that instance, like, and don't tell me you don't like it. Tell me it doesn't work and tell me why it doesn't work. I'm not going to go from an anecdotal, well, my wife didn't understand it. That's not going to make me, change my direction. If you give me some solid data and insights that helps me understand why my audience isn't going to understand it, then that's an entirely different conversation. But you just get overloaded with feedback. Let's put it like that. So that's been a big learning for me at Shell for sure.
Yeah. All right. So when you left Shell, what position were you in? And I guess to touch on the point you talked about earlier, how did you know it was the right time for a new challenge?
Yeah. So I was looking after the integrated marketing communications, as I say, for Shell. And I had a team of people. My team were dispersed across the globe as well. So I was working and mobilizing a team that was like, I had one girl in India, I had a guy in the US, I had people all over the place, a lady in Turkey. So again, like that was quite a challenge in that sense, but it was great because I think we didn't call it this, but I've called it this in other places. It's like you have the kind of chase the sun model, which is you can pass from country to country through your team to get work done. So actually you've got a 24-hour cycle of work happening. So that can work really, really well. But yeah, I think I think you can you just sense when you're kind of done. You get tired. You don't have the same passion for it. You start, I know that what I'm like, I start to feel a little bit I feel a bit of tension in me, and I feel a little bit of like anxiety, and just get to the point where I think, do I really have to do this today? Because a lot of the stuff I was doing at Shell particularly was, because I was working with 20 or 25 different countries, I was repeating and presenting the same thing over and over and over, because as a global team, we had to sell it into the local markets and I always had lots of energy and passion for that. And I just kind of got to a point where I was like, things were starting to change. So there was different leadership. There was different people that were coming in. Again, it comes back to the culture thing. The culture started to change for me. And then I was just like, do you know what? I think it's time. And actually what happened was this all happened in and around the pandemic kicking in. So this was like early 2020. Yeah. And Shell actually had started to talk about offering voluntary redundancy for people that were working out of the UK, the Netherlands, and the US, because we're the most expensive countries. So at that point, I was one of the first. I went, yes, it's time. It's time. It was a big bullet to bite, in the sense of I'd been there for 7 years. It was nerve-wracking because you're like, But the other thing, I was looking for another job already. So I'd secured another job in one of the scale-ups that I talked about. And so it was less dodgy, in the sense of like I had a job to go to, and then I took voluntary redundancy, so it was like a double bubble essentially. But it was just I don't know, maybe a little bit of, I don't know, toxicity is not the right word, but like just a little bit of like an undercurrent of this just doesn't feel right anymore.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's okay, because, you know, it's not like in the old days where everyone used to stay in the same company for like 30 years and then they'd retire. It doesn't work like that. And like I said earlier, there's a big old world outside of Shell or outside of whatever organization you're working in. And, you know, it's okay. It's okay to not be feeling as passionate and as energetic. And it's just time to move on at that point. So it's just knowing in yourself, like how you feel and when it's the right time.
Yeah, I think it's really important to listen out for those signs. And I think that you're right. And yeah, you don't have to stay somewhere forever. And I guess, you know, you might have explored other opportunities that were within Shell, but if you know, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Shell's a really good organization for wanting you to be a generalist, actually. So they would actively, I'm going to exaggerate slightly, but they'd actively encourage you to move from marketing to HR to IT, because they just, that's how that organization is set up. And so like every 4 years, your window would open and you were actively encouraged to apply for other jobs. But I just knew that I just wanted to be in marketing. And I remember my early days at Shell talking to the HR director, and he was looking at me as if I had three heads when I said, I just want to stay in marketing. I love it. Why would I want to be moving into any other part of the business? This is just my lane. So I was just like happy to stay where I was. But I think Shell was set up for people to kind of move around a lot. And, you know, a lot of the same people do stay in Shell, actually. So you can see the ones that have got the sort of, you know, their career mapped out across Shell, really. So yeah, I mean, every organization is different.
Yeah, and like we said earlier, it's just finding the right fit for you, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And this is what I just go back to, like, just believe in yourself, back yourself. It's your career. It's nobody else's career. So don't let anybody else tell you like, oh, you should be doing that, or you should be doing that. They can advise you, right? And that's what you have mentors for, and that's what you have sponsors for, and that's what you have, you know, role models for, to advise you. But ultimately it's your decision. You're the only person that can make that decision, rightly or wrongly. And I don't know that there's ever a wrong thing. It's just because you always learn from it anyway.
Yeah. All right. So tell us about the scale-up experiences between Shell and Zero Gravity.
Yeah, that they were really interesting. So when I was at Shell, and for all of my career, I've managed B2C predominantly with some B2B experience. But the two scale-ups that I worked for were both B2B. One was in kind of like renewable fuel. So I kind of had I'd gone from Shell to there. So kind of there was a bit of a connection. And then the other one was like a communications, more on the software side. So I was kind of back in the telco space then. So it was like quite comfortable in terms of like the industries that I was working in. But really different in the sense of like B2B is like, when you start working in B2B, the way that people's minds work is like, the consumer looks like this and the business looks like this. And our CMO at Shell used to talk about business to humans, or B2H. So he's absolutely right, is that, you know, if you're targeting me as a business person, I'm still Kim who goes on Facebook and Instagram at the weekend and in the evenings, or, you know, reads a certain paper or watches a certain Netflix series or whatever. I'm still the same person. So why would you choose not to talk to me as that person? And so that for me was like really, that's one of the sort of, I guess, not changes, but some of the sort of evolution that I brought to both those two businesses, which was, it's business to human. I stole it from Shell. I full disclosure, I stole it from Shell. But like, you know, it absolutely is the right thing to do. And you start to then build out a more emotional brand that people will buy into, right? So they're not sort of buy from, they're going to buy into the brand. And so you have to have that emotional level of connection with the brand. You have to feel that you belong to that brand, or that you have something that resonates with that brand. And so I think that, you know, for me, there were really exciting times in the sense of like, oh, I'm in this B2B world. It feels quite rational, and I don't think it should be. So let's just try something new. So that was really good. And then the other thing that I really appreciated and experienced it for the first time in the first organization I was with, I had, for the first time ever, I had an in-house designer. So I'm going back to why my team set up the way it's set up now. I had an in-house designer called Matt, who was phenomenal. And like, literally, if you work with agencies, and I love working with agencies, one of my best friends works for Iris Worldwide, they're brilliant. But they can be slow because they have their process and their structure and they want you to do this, this, and this. I would just go to Matt, do this for me, please. And it'd be, he'd go, when do you want it? I go, well, you can give it me end of the week. It's like, I can have it for tomorrow if you want. I was like, okay. So he was brilliant. And then when I moved to the next company called Infobit, there was already a creative team of about 25 people. So I had about 40 or 50 people in my organization, and about 25 of them were in the creative space. So they were doing all sorts of stuff. It was just brilliant because you just have your in-house. It's all. So I kind of set it up like an in-house agency and said, would say to the board, for example, I've saved you this much money this month by having this team in-house. Because if you look at their salary versus what an agency is going to charge you, like they're just poles apart. So again, that goes back to what you were saying before about how do you get people to buy into brand? It's like talk money, talk return on investment, demonstrate the savings that you've made. And so from here on in, I swear I will always have an in-house team. Even if we're working with agencies as well, there are things that you can do in-house and be much more nimble with. And also they understand and love your brand because they are your brand, because they work for your brand. So they've got their own sort of passion for what they're doing as well. So yeah, they're the kind of two things I would say on those two scale-ups that were the biggest, I guess, the kind of biggest memorable moments for me.
Yeah. Oh, that's really great. And actually, you're just reminded me of a conversation I had with my friend a couple of weeks back. So when I started the podcast, this is just not my background. I knew nothing about most of the things that I'm doing right now, apart from interviewing. And so I built a website, taught myself how to build a website with YouTube and some other great online courses. But I said to my friend the other day, I'm so happy that I learned those skills, because now if I see something that I want to change, I just quickly go into the back end, change it, done. Whereas a few years back, I actually paid someone to build a website for me for a different thing. And I thought, my goodness, and only because I was scared, because I didn't know anything about it and didn't have the time to, get educated on it. But I thought, well, what a pain would it have been if I'd have had to be like, oh, hi, can you just change this word? And they'd be like, yeah, sure. And then they do it. And then, like you say, get it back in however long, because they're juggling you with their other clients. So, yeah, I think there's something to be said for just trying to get educated and do it yourself, or if you can, have those resources at your fingertips.
I mean, you still, I mean, the agencies are always going to be the most creative people in the room, and so that's what they're there for. That's what they're set up to do. And what obviously the benefits of working with an agency is that they are working across clients, so they can bring lots of different experience to the table. Whereas if you have an in-house team, they're just learning from what they're doing within our brand. So there are pros and cons, but for me, it's like you've got to have some form of in-house something that's just going to help you get stuff done quickly. Full credit to my team, because like the content that they create, like genuinely, if I didn't work for Zero Gravity and I'm not a TikTok user, I would be following Zero Gravity on TikTok, because we do such a great job of the content, which is funny, it's entertaining, it's educational. So I would still be following Zero Gravity on TikTok and Instagram, because the content that my team create is phenomenal, and we've got the results to back that up as well. That's not just me being biased. So it's great having that in-house capability.
Yeah, thank you. And then I guess that brings you where you are today, to Zero Gravity.
It does. Yeah.
All right.
Long journey, 20 years almost.
So looking back on your career journey so far, what would you call out as the high?
I probably just go back to what I said before about like working at Motorola on the Razr device, working at Shell, moving from product to platform, and the global experience that I've had. I mean, I love Zero Gravity, by the way, so I'm not taking that away, but there isn't a moment there just yet that happened that can sort of surpass those other moments, but it will. And the thing I'm looking forward to at Zero Gravity the thing I'm looking forward to at Zero Gravity is this maximizing value for the Series A funding round, because again, I haven't gone through that myself personally, and I've got to go through it with these guys, and I can't wait to do it, because we've got a great team of people that I'm going to learn from it, right? So that for me, I'm hoping will be my fourth highlight if we were to have this podcast in another 6 months' time, to tell you about that one.
We'll do a part two.
Yeah.
Again, looking back on your career journey so far, what's been the biggest challenge or failure or limiting belief you've had to overcome?
I think it's a slight skew on the question, I suppose, in terms of answering that, because there's always highs and lows in your career. But I think in terms of being helpful, I suppose, is like when you first start your career, you just have no fear because you don't know stuff, right? So a little bit like when you're a kid and you're learning how to ski and you throw yourself down the nursery slope and you see the adults going, I'm trying, but I know I'm going to hurt myself if I fall over. I wish part of me could go back to that point where I didn't know, so I didn't have the fear, and there that imposter syndrome probably would disappear a little bit. I think that's kind of like one. I'm not saying it's a low, but it's kind of like just a learning, I guess. And then the other thing would be, and again, I say this to my team a lot, is 80% is good enough. Don't faff around with that that 1% that's going to get you this much improvement. 80% is good enough because we've got a lot to do and a lot to deliver. So don't don't faff around with that bit where you're going to get no return. Be fearless, and then also make mistakes so that you can learn quicker. I think those are the big things. So I've made some mistakes that maybe we don't need to talk about now, but I've made some mistakes that literally I have learned from them. And what's quite interesting, when I was at Shell, one of our EVPs, we made a massive screw up in Germany, I think it was, but he actually stood up on the stage and went, "This is what you've done. This is what we've learned from it, and that's fantastic." And he celebrated. It was a massive failure, but he celebrated it because there were massive learnings from it as well, which is, again, you observe these things as you go through your career, and you kind of take these bits and you use it in your everyday. So like, I celebrate mistakes. I tell my team to test and learn all the time, and we're in a position where we can, 80% is definitely good enough, and try to be less fearful of situations and try not to second guess what's going to happen, because you never quite know.
No, absolutely not. And make mistakes, it's, if you can learn from it, then it's fine, isn't it? It's rarely the end of the world. Yeah,
exactly. I always say, like, there's no emergency in marketing ever, right? So there's no major screw up in marketing either. Like, well, there could be, but you're not going to be that stupid. But you do need to test things to know whether they're going to work or not.
Yeah, I'm just remembering one of my friends. It was quite near the beginning of the pandemic, and he was a colleague and a friend. He was he was not feeling so well, and he felt like bad about taking time off because it was very busy, and we were just getting into the pandemic and so on. And I always remember this moment when the person on, I guess, the other end of the line, 111 or whatever, said to him, and what is it you do for a living? And then he had to kind of think, I work in HR. I'm not in a life or death situation here. I'm not, no one is going to die if I have a week off to get better. So I always think that's a nice, a bit of a reminder that,
It's so true. It's so true. And I say to my team, if you feel ill, please go home or stay at home, and make sure that you get yourself better before you come back. None of this nonsense of, I'm going to work from home. If you're working from home, you're well enough to be working. So if you're feeling unwell, you can't get yourself better if you continue to do the things that have driven you down in the first place. So I think it's really important that people really do take that time to kind of like turn off your body and let it recuperate, and then come back refreshed, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I'm wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about role models and mentors and sponsors and how they've impacted you in your career journey.
I actually wrote a LinkedIn post on International Women's Day, because literally I've been so lucky in terms of like some of the women that have been my role models since my career. I mentioned Michelle Butler earlier. Simone Sweeney as well, who I worked with at Motorola. She went on to work at Lego. Really big, successful career. But these were the people that were there right at the very beginning when I needed a cheerleader, somebody who was going to support me. I needed somebody to kind of be my guiding light of this is the way you should do it, or this is the way you should go. And then I also needed somebody to kick my butt from time to time to sort me out if I was doing something slightly wrong or slightly in the. I think having those role models like right at the very beginning, and I was fortunate that they were all female as well. I think I was listening to one of your podcasts earlier, and I heard somebody say, "Oh, a lot of my my role models have been male," and I was like, "Well, I actually really enjoy working with men. Don't get me wrong, but I think I have learned so much from those ladies, and I'm eternally grateful for the impact that they've had on my career. But but just on that point on gender, I don't ever think about gender. It's not something that I think, oh, I'm a female, so I can't do that, or shouldn't do that. I'm just me. I'm just kind of authentic to who I am. So I think, do away with the gender thing because it's just not important. But essentially they were sort of like my big role models. I think, the other thing that I had was, when I was at Shell, I had a mentor called Henry, who was one of the GMs, so super senior in the business. And I learned from him how to navigate the business. Like that was a thing I wanted to get from him, because I go back to that point around stakeholder management. Who do I need to talk to about this, and that? So he was really helpful from that perspective. And I reached out to him directly and said, would you mind being, and at Shell, to be fair, they encouraged you to have senior mentors in the business. So that was really helpful. And then I also did some executive coaching. I was really lucky that I was sponsored again by Shell. I worked with a guy called Matt Radley, Matt Radley Associates, who's a coaching organization. And so I went through my own journey with him in terms of learning more about me, which that had its ups and downs. And then I went through a separate coaching session, which was coaching with confidence. And so that was all about learning for me to coach other people and learning how to do that and giving you some tools to do that as well. So I think I've been really fortunate in the sense of I've had mentors, I've had coaching, I've had role models, and people that have really sponsored me and sort of spotlighted me in certain organizations. Not always, it doesn't always work that way, but and again, that probably goes back to the most memorable organizations is where I've had people who are championing me. So I think, I'm eternally grateful to those individuals for helping me with that.
Yeah. And I think ask for help. 9 times out of 10, people want to help because they've been helped. They want to pay it forward. So, for anybody that's thinking, oh, I just wouldn't dare, or I, feel too nervous, just, bite the bullet and ask for help.
Yeah, definitely. Raise a flag. It's not a weakness. It's not a weakness to ask for help. Actually, it's a really good leadership strength to have. Is to put your hand up and say, like I said earlier, I don't have all the answers, so I'm not going to pretend that I do. So if I need help, I'm going to put my flag up and say, help me. Or if I'm struggling with something, help me, because I don't have all the answers. I need input from other people, and sometimes you just need somebody actually just to give you a bit of a pick me up. So it's definitely okay to ask for help.
Yeah, thank you. All right. So for somebody out there who's thinking, oh, I really like the sound of brand and marketing and so on, what advice would you give them with regards to helpful education or training?
Yeah, I think going back to the point I was making about internships, right? So one of the things, so we're running an internship at Zero Gravity starting in July. And this time we're doing it slightly differently. So we get one intern per team. And so I have one intern coming into my team. And one of the things that was quite interesting, because we went through an interview process for that as well, was just trying to understand, probably at that stage of their career, i.e. not into career, they're actually still at uni. They're like, I'm interested in marketing, but I don't know what part of marketing I'm interested in. And it's a very individual thing.
Yeah.
So what I'm organizing for her, so she'll be with us for 6 weeks. So what I'm organizing is 2 things. One is allowing her to sit for a week with each of the different parts of the team so she can learn about whether it's PR or social or web or brand that I'm interested in. But also having her work from brief to execution on one campaign so that she can see all the different parts and all the different flow parts of that campaign. So that she could get a really good feel for everything that's brand and marketing. Because I don't, that would be my biggest advice is I've done BTL, I've done ATL, I've done digital, I've done brand, I've done all of it, most of it. maybe not all of it, most of it, and like just kind of like found my way through it and just kind of realized what I like. I never had the opportunity to do an internship or something like that, or work experience that just lets me get a feel for it. So I had to make decisions based on my career. So if you're kind of at uni or early career stage and you want to get into marketing, I would just try to get into some kind of generalist work experience or internship if you can, that gives you that exposure to all the different parts, because you're going to be really good at all of it, but you're going to love one or two areas of it probably. And that will change over time as well, right? So you might start off thinking, yeah, PR is the place for me. And then you might think, actually, you know what, I don't mind a bit of social media as well. And then you kind of like, also you can expand your experience and put it all together.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you. And would you say that somebody needs to do a marketing degree or a business degree, or is there flexibility there?
Part of me says don't bother with having a specific degree. Part of me thinks like if because now it feels like, unless you're studying to be a doctor or something like that, where you have to have a specific degree to do that job. Like, I think, now it's like, it's different probably from when you and I went to university, but now it feels like getting a degree is like, it's a must have, right? So you have to have your GCSEs, you have to have your A-level, and you really do need to have a degree. There are other ways around it, of course. You can do an apprenticeship and get a degree at the same time, which I quite like that idea. I wish that had been available to me when I was growing up. But I don't, from a marketing perspective, like, yeah, sure, you can study marketing at uni if you want. But so long as you've got a good grounding, like one of the girls in my team, she just graduated from Oxford with a first in English, and she's working on content. So I think so long as you just have a really good grounding and you've used university as well as it's kind of like your school of life as well, I think you can get into marketing if you've got the right kind of personality for it, I guess, rather than actually saying, right, specifically I need to study brand and stuff. Although, it, as I said earlier, it kind of stood me in good stead in the sense of like, it gave me, it opened a door for me, but it wasn't the be all and end all, because you learned so much on the job that how much have I remembered from university through the last 20 years? Not very much.
the 4 Ps.
Yeah, the 4 Ps. Yeah, you can have the 4 Ps. Although I think they're arguing that there's 7 Ps now, but anyway.
Yeah. If we think about softer skills, so non-technical skills, if you think about yourself and those that you've worked around who've been successful in your rise, what are the skills that really stand out that you feel are helpful in a marketing or branding role?
I think it's the leadership skills, and it's being emotionally intelligent. And again, that's a learning, and that's kind of a thing that comes with maturity, and you're never brilliant at it, because even yesterday I kind of had a moment where I was like, but you just learn to kind of like control your emotions a little bit more. But it's the leadership thing, and you don't have to be a team leader to be a leader, if that makes sense. So if you own something, so you own a project, or you own a product, or you own whatever it might be, own it and lead it, and sort of drive that yourself, because you have to lead people. Even if you don't have a job title that says I'm a team leader, you still, like, going back to what I was saying before about that ruthless collaboration and the collaboration across departments or markets or teams or whatever, you've still got to lead people. So if you can hone those leadership skills, be emotionally intelligent with it, and then really kind of identify the strengths and weaknesses of the people around you that you're working with, and pull a team together based on who and what you need. And it's not an official team; it's just a project team, or it's just a sort of a quasi team. It's literally having those people, but leading them and demonstrating, like I said earlier, like demonstrate the vision, show them where you want to go, to help them understand how they can contribute to that journey, and get their feedback. Because if you get them to help you build that vision, they're more likely to come on the journey with you, rather than you going, this is what we're doing. They actually, because then if they've built it with you, they feel like they've contributed, and they're emotionally attached to it as well.
Yeah.
So I think that the leadership side of it is like, as I say, it's not management, it's leadership, and they're two different things.
Yeah, and it sounds as though you're talking about influencing and persuading as well there.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think as a real world example to demonstrate how that process of works of the stakeholder points you just raised, if you think about, I don't know, a celebrity like a Kim Kardashian, she'll often put a tweet or an Instagram out that says, I don't know, which outfit do you think I should wear for this party, or which bottle do you like best for this perfume? And she gets the audience to contribute. And then, of course, those people are now vested. And so they now want to go and buy that thing. So I think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just get your audience involved, whether there is an internal or an external audience. It's really important that everyone understands and everyone contributes to that.
Yeah. All right. So, Kim, what's the future of branding and marketing?
Well, I think the future is the unknown. But I think one of the things that we need to keep an eye out, and I know that it's all very kind of like on vogue at the moment, but is all around AI. Because I think that, AI definitely is going to impact things like, copywriting, for example. So ChatGPT can do that. I mean, it still needs some human interaction, but ChatGPT can do that for you. Or we were talking before we started recording about podcast editing, and how you can find software that can actually edit the podcast for you. It's like this, but what it's going to do, I keep reading these headlines like, it's going to take your job, blah, blah. Listen, not in our lifetime, I don't believe, but I do believe it's going to make our jobs easier. And so I'm all for embracing it. I mean, it goes back to me being a bit of a techie geek as well, but I'm all for embracing ChatGPT and all the other AI that's going to help me just be more efficient. I think that's the thing just to keep an eye on and watch out.
Yeah. And what about, I don't know, do you know anything about the metaverse? Is that going to be a thing?
It very much could be. I don't know right now if that's not in our world currently, but I think again, it's just something to watch out for. I mean, I think this is the thing, is like you've got to kind of stay abreast of like all these different things that are coming. Some are going to be a bit of a whim, some are going to actually have a proper impact. So I think, just be aware and just try to keep yourself abreast of all kind of like, up and coming technology and programs that are happening that's going to help you and or sort of impact your working environment.
Yeah, thank you. So for somebody who wants to find out a bit more, where would you direct them? Any online resources or books or that you'd recommend?
Book. I have actually got like 1,000 marketing books, but they're probably out of date just as they're printed. But I think, and there's so many different places on the internet. The one place that I will go to religiously is Marketing Week, because I think that just gives you a really good oversight of like what brands are doing, some of the struggles that they've had, really good interviews with CMOs and other people that are in the marketing division. And then the other place that I typically go to, which might not be so helpful, but when I'm working with agencies, like agencies can also oftentimes they'll do like a lunch and learn or a breakfast thing where they'll invite their clients along and talk about things that are coming down the pipeline and stuff to be aware of. So there would be my kind of two go-to things. But Marketing Week is free. I mean, well, you can subscribe to it, but there's free stuff that you can read, and you can get. I get like a weekly bulletin email that comes through that just basically gives me an overview of what's happening in the marketing world, and then you can dig a bit deeper, and then you find yourself going down a rabbit hole and finding yourself all over the internet. But that kind of gives you a good steer on what's happening.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Kim, what do you know now that you wish you'd known when you were just starting out on your career journey?
I think probably from a team leading perspective, one of the things that I have learned is about different personalities. And when I first started to build my own team, I think like a little bit narcissistically, I was looking for mini-me's, and that's absolutely not the right thing to do. And so one of the things that I have learned, and I wish that I'd known, was that there are different personality types, and I'm going to just use two examples like of personality types which are quite extreme. But like there's introverts and there's extroverts, and when we think about introverts and extroverts, in the kind of like in your normal life, it's somebody who's loud and somebody who's quiet. But when we talk about it in the workspace, it's slightly different. And somebody who's an extrovert might get lots of energy from being with people, and somebody who's an introvert is a little bit quieter, but they're thinking before they speak, whereas someone like me will just go, just say it, so I don't really need to think about it, it comes out. And so I used to get a little bit frustrated with a particular team member that I had, that I always felt like he wasn't interested in the meetings and that he wasn't really paying any attention. And then occasionally he'd say something, but when he said something that was a really golden nugget of like thoughtful, insightful content that he was offering. And I learned, and actually I learned this more so when I was doing the coaching as well, is that, you know, not everybody behaves the same. And you've got to be aware of these different personality traits that somebody who is an introvert in that instance is not going to sort of shout and scream over me or you because we're talkative. So you've got to give people the space to breathe and think and talk. So one of the things that I learned through coaching was like, always when you're doing the kind of questioning or the presenting or whatever, is always like take an extra 5 seconds before you speak, because as you're about to speak, probably that person was about to talk and you've just cut over them. And if you carry on talking, you only know what you've already said, but if you listen, you'll learn something new. So they're the big things for me. I think like I wish that I'd known earlier on, is that, you know, not everyone is talkative, not everyone's going to say something, but you know, some people have got really interesting things to say. They just need the time and space to think about it before they actually say it.
Yeah, that's great advice. And what would you say to 10-year-old Kim with the snake and the Duran Duran t-shirt about what lies ahead?
I would say, I'll take it from my favorite quote, because I actually was presenting at a conference the other day, and I was forced to think about my favorite quote, and which is be yourself, because everybody is already taken. So this, going back to your question, which is be authentic and be genuine, because if you try to be something or somebody you're not, everyone will see through it. So just always be yourself. Don't try, you know, if you are that introvert, don't try and be the extrovert, because it's not going to work, and vice versa. So just be who you are, and, you know, and be true and honest to yourself, and be comfortable in your own skin, essentially.
Yeah, that's great advice, isn't it? And I think that I'm just thinking of that introvert now. It's almost like have that self-awareness, be your authentic self. And if you're not getting what you need from your leader, just, you know, say to them, hey, I tend to answer questions better if you ask me to give you feedback the day after, or just in a meeting situation, you might notice I'm quite quiet, but what I'll do, if it's okay, is send you my ideas after the meeting's finished. So, you know, knowing yourself, but having the confidence to share that, because the leaders aren't mind readers, are we?
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. Speak up. Just tell us how. I often say to my team, you know, like, how do you best like to work? What do you need more from me? What do you need less from me? But not everyone's going to ask you the question. So you've just got to be a bit more forthright. Put yourself forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Kim, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been amazing. Are there any final words of wisdom or encouragement you'd like to share with the audience before we go?
I honestly just go back to what I was just saying about, like, just back yourself, be authentic, be genuine. There is only one of you, right? You can't duplicate that. So I would just keep and run your own race. That's what I would say, is run your own race. It's your career, it's your decision, it's your life. So just make sure that you're living it and loving it the way that you really want to. And then it's nobody else's business other than yours.
I love it. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're very welcome. Nice to see you.
Thank you so much for joining Kim and I today. We really hope you enjoyed the show. If you gained any value out of today's episode, please share it with your friends and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have any questions, comments or suggestions, do get in touch with us. So until next time, have a really good think about company culture, because being happy and being fulfilled at work is everything. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.